Welcome. We're so happy that everyone here has decided to share their Saturday afternoon to hear about the prayer that heals. Myrtle Smyth from Belfast, Northern Ireland, has led a rich and varied life as a wife, mother, Christian Science practitioner, prison chaplain, writer, and lecturer. Today, she'll share some of her precious examples of how the Christ is made practical in bringing healing into our own experiences. The prayer that heals. Let's welcome Myrtle Smyth.
So what do you think it was that drew people to the Master? He healed their problems. He showed them there was a way out. He showed them there was a solution. But most of all, he showed them that it was not the will of God for anybody to suffer. When I came into Christian Science many, many years ago, I thought I'll never have another problem in this world. Because Christian Science has the answer to it all, and it's all so simple. But you know, it's like the faster you go up the motorway, the more dirt comes up around your car. And that's the way it is, even in Christian Science. As you grow spiritward, it seems sometimes like you get more difficult problems to work out. Just the same as if you were learning maths in school. You start out with the simple sums, and then you go on to bigger ones. And that's the way it is in Christian Science. But there was a time in Northern Ireland when our troubles were very bad, and I also had a violent marriage. And every day we were having terrible bombings and people being killed and so forth. And we lived in an area that was right in the middle of all these problems. And we had tried to sell our house because I really felt that this was no place to bring children up in. And because of where the house was situated, it wouldn't sell. And one day I was in the house alone, and 13 bombs went off in the space of 1 hour. I heard 1, and then 2, and then 3. And when it got to number 4, my house shook. And some of the windows broke. And I began to wonder if I should go up to the school that my children attended to see if they were okay, because it wasn't too far away. And I went out to the door, and I opened the door, and people were running everywhere. There were sirens going, fire brigades, and people panicking. The bombs were still going off, and people didn't seem to know where to run to. And I remember that a woman passed my door and looked at me, and I remember thinking that I'd never seen such a war-weary, hopeless look before. And I came into my house, and I was frightened, and I was crying, and I was angry. And after a while I thought, you know, I am a Christian Scientist, and I'm supposed to know better how to pray. And yet I felt that my prayers were not having much effect. And the Christian Science Monitor, we get the international edition. This was a Friday, and the Monitor had been on my table since Monday, unopened. And I decided to try to calm myself and to have a look at the Monitor. And I went through about the first 6 pages, and I noticed that I had visited 8 different countries, and that their problems were not very different to mine. And at that particular moment I was thinking, if God could answer my prayer at this moment, what would I say to him? I would say, dear God, take me and my children on a big plane and drop us off at some nice peaceful place. But when I looked at the Monitor, I thought, well, you know, God might have a hard time because there aren't that many peaceful places left in the world. So I began to reason with this. Well, is the answer to get up and run away. And I began to see, no, I need to learn how to pray more effectively. I need the prayer that heals. So I opened the Christian Science textbook on the chapter on prayer. And I read what Mrs. Eddy said there, that we have to go into our closet and silence the material senses. But then she said, our Master gave us one brief prayer, which we name after him the Lord's Prayer. And she said that that prayer was adequate to meet all human needs. She didn't say some human needs. She said all human needs. So I opened the Bible and I read the Lord's Prayer. I read where the disciples said to the Master, teach us to pray. Because they were saying, boy, his prayers sure get answered. And they were saying to him, teach us to pray like that. And he only gave them one brief prayer, the Lord's Prayer. So the Master must have thought that that prayer was enough to meet all human needs. Now, Mrs. Eddy in the textbook gives us her beautiful interpretation of the Lord's Prayer, which I love. But that day, I felt I need to understand the Lord's Prayer a lot better. I need to understand how to apply it to this particular problem. 13 bombs going off in the space of an hour. Many people killed, many people maimed, many people left without homes and businesses. How do you apply the Lord's Prayer to that? So I began to pray with the Lord's Prayer something like this. Our Father. And when I said our Father, I pictured a big round O for our Father. And I knew that that included everybody and everything. It didn't say anything about Catholic or Protestant. It said, our Father, the Father of us all. It included all the people who had just died in this bombing. And I knew that many people would have. So I knew that our Father was still their Father. That he did not see his children as dead. He saw man as he made him, spiritual and whole and perfect, the expression of life eternal. And that's how these people were. I thought about the injured people and the people who had to deal with them, the doctors and the nurses in the hospitals. Our Father was their Father, and he was taking care of their every need. And then I began to think about the security forces who had a nasty job to do that day, to go out and pick up the pieces. And I knew that our Father was their Father, and that he would meet their need. I thought about the government and how they had to make big decisions and quick decisions on a day like this. And I knew that our Father would meet their need. I thought about all the relatives of the people who had been killed or injured, and I knew that our Father was also our Mother, and that he would comfort them, and he would meet their need right where they were. I thought about the ministers and the priests who had to go out and somehow try to comfort their own flock, and I knew that our Father would take care of that too. And then I came to the IRA, and I thought about that big round O, and I said to myself, well, I'm not going to include them in that. At that moment I really felt I couldn't. How could you pray for people who deliberately went out and planted these bombs? But you know, God, he never lets us away with anything, so I escaped for a moment, but I had to come back to it. Our Father, which art in heaven, When I prayed, which art in heaven, I thought, what does that mean? Does that mean that heaven is a beautiful city up in the sky, whose streets are paved with gold, and there's no sickness and no disease? Because if that were true, we should all die and go there. We'd be better off. But I began to think, what is heaven? It's a state of consciousness, a state of being at peace and undisturbed by anything that's going on in this world, or by anything that's going on in a material body or in your life. Our Father, which art in heaven. Our Father dwells in heaven eternally, not just for a moment. He cannot be disturbed by wars and bombs and killings and maimings and disease and old age and death. He's undisturbed by it. He doesn't see it. So I began to think, Our Father which art in heaven. So it's not so much that God's down here on earth comforting us, but that we are one with Him, so we are in heaven right now. So I lifted myself and all the people in my country up into heaven to know that we're in heaven too. We're in a state of consciousness that cannot be disturbed by anything that appears to be going on in this world. Our Father, which art in heaven. Because He's in heaven, we're in heaven too. That's where each and every one of you are this instant, in the kingdom of heaven, at peace, undisturbed by anything or anyone. Hallowed be thy name. When I prayed that, I thought, well, God's name is hallowed, and that means revered, respected, honored, adored. And if that is God's name, and it is, then that's the name of all His children. So His children's name isn't Catholic or Protestant or black or white. The name of each child of God is hallowed be thy name. And I saw that I had to respect my brother's name. His name was hallowed. Thy kingdom come. Here I prayed that God would help us to see His kingdom right here, where we saw a part of the United Kingdom that was involved in a war. Thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Here I prayed that God's will would be done here in Ireland as it is in heaven, that it would be seen to be done. Give us this day our daily bread. Here I prayed that God would feed us with fresh inspiration, with hope, with faith. Give us this day our daily bread. Feed us, Father, because we needed feeding. We needed fresh inspiration. And forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. Now when I got to that bit, I said, my Father, you don't mean that. You have slipped up. You couldn't possibly be telling us to forgive the IRA, to forgive people who committed these atrocious murders. But I went on to read that the Master said, love your enemies, bless those that persecute you and despitefully use you. And then he went on to say, that ye may be the children of your Father which is in heaven. I suddenly saw I had no choice. If I want to be the child of my Father which is in heaven, and I do, then I have to forgive everybody, because I cannot make my own demonstration until I do. And then I began to see that if I prayed for them and I asked God to bless them, I was opening a door to their healing. But if I said there's no way I'm going to pray for them, the door was closed. They had become hopeless. And who else was going to pray for them? So I found that I was able to pray for them and felt a great sense of peace. I asked God that He would forgive them and that He would show them a better way. I knew that they believed that a united Ireland was their goal in life and that they could use any methods they wanted to get that. But I prayed, dear God, show them a better way. And they're now seeing a better way. Even though it has taken 30 years of prayer, that prayer that heals. You know, we think we want healed yesterday. And it's our sense of timing. We've got it all wrong. We think that 30 years is an awful long time, but it's nothing to God. So it's not how long it takes. It's the persistence. It's the consistency in our prayers. Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And deliver us from evil. Deliver us from believing in evil. Deliver us from giving it power and authority. It doesn't have it. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. This was God's kingdom. It wasn't a part of the United Kingdom. It was somehow missing out on God. It was God's kingdom. The power was His. So the power was not in the gun or the bomb or the bullet. The power was God's. And the glory would be His. So they could not claim glory. It would be God's glory. The glory would be His. Do you know, when I finished that prayer, I felt like a different person. I had been all uptight for months and months. I had been wanting to move out of this country, and even if the house didn't sell, I just wanted to get me and my kids out of there. And suddenly, after saying the Lord's Prayer like that, I suddenly felt, why should I run away? I haven't done anything wrong. I'm going to stay here and be a part of the solution and not run away and be a part of the problem. I just felt I wanted to open my windows and doors and shout to everybody, come in here. I want to tell you about the prayer that heals, about the power of the Lord's Prayer, the prayer that our Master gave us to pray. I was feeling absolutely great. I wasn't worried about my children anymore. I knew there were still all these sirens and noises and lots of things going. Nothing had changed outside, but I had changed. And that was a lesson for that day, that everything out there, the whole world doesn't have to change. We have to change. We have to change our view of the world and pray for the world in this way. Well, about 20 minutes after that, my doorbell went, and I went out to the door, and a man was standing there. And as I opened the door, I noticed that his face was a sort of a purple colour, and there was like foam coming from his mouth. And he fell into my hallway. It was a long, narrow hallway. So I got down on the floor beside him, and I had to get the door closed because of the noise outside. And I pulled him by the shoulders down the hallway, and then I closed the door, and I got down beside him, and he kept pointing towards his heart. And I felt, this must be some kind of a heart attack. He couldn't speak. And I was wearing a little tea apron, and I took the tea apron and I wiped his face, and I held his hand, and I said, Mister, I don't know who you are, and I don't know what side of the fence you come from, but it really doesn't matter. I know that you're God's child and that He loves you. And I said, I'm sure that you know the Lord's Prayer. And he nodded his head. And I said, well, I've just said the Lord's Prayer and it has done wonders for me. And I'm going to go over it again with you in mind. So I was still holding his hand, and I closed my eyes and I said, Our Father. Now I said to him, Our Father means every part of your body, from your toes to your head. God made every part of you. Now He made you spiritual. He doesn't see you as material. But right now you're thinking of yourself in terms of mortality, that you're immortal. So let's apply it to every part of your human body, from your toes right up, from your toes to your nails, to your ankles, to your bones, to your tummy, to your heart, to your lungs, to your mind. Every part of you our Father made. And every part of you is perfect and whole and eternal and sound and good. And every part of you is working in perfect harmony with every other part of you. Our Father, Mother, God, all harmonious. If He's all harmonious, and He is, then you're all harmonious too. There's no discord in your being. I went right through the Lord's Prayer, and when I got to the bit, forgive us our debts, and I said to Him, you know, we have to forgive the IRA and the people who are bombing and so forth. But when I came to the end of the Lord's Prayer, I opened my eyes and I looked, and I could see the colour coming back into his face from his chin right up. Where it had been all red, it suddenly got a natural colour right up. It was just easing, like something had lifted right off him. And I helped him up and into a chair, and it was lunchtime, and I said, look, I'll make you a sandwich and a cup of tea. And he began to tell me his story. He told me that 4 or 5 months ago, his wife was alone in the house and someone threw a bomb through his window. His house was absolutely destroyed and his wife was killed. And he and his wife only had one child, a daughter aged 19. And she was absolutely distraught at losing her mother and their home. So after the funeral, the father decided to take her to England for a holiday. And he said, maybe when we're there we will like England, and maybe we should live there and not come back to Ireland anymore. And they went over to England, and this girl was so distraught he just couldn't pacify her. He couldn't comfort her. And she took a heart attack and died at only 19. And this man came home alone, and he had no home, and he had no wife, and he had no daughter. And on his first day home, he suffered a heart attack. He was taken into the intensive care unit of our local hospital and had just been released that morning. He said, I was walking up the road and I didn't know where to go. They told me I'll never work again. I didn't know where to go, and I don't know why I rang your doorbell. And I said, well, mister, I know why you did. And I'm glad you didn't ring it about 20 minutes ago. Because I wouldn't have been all prayed up. I wouldn't have been any help to you at all. And I told him how the Lord's Prayer had helped me. Well, that man was able to stay in my home for some months. When he went back to the hospital for a checkup, they couldn't believe it. They couldn't find any sign of heart trouble. He went back to work, and soon he got a little apartment. Now that's always been an inspiration to me. Sometimes if I have a patient and the problem's not working out, I say, okay, it's time for the Lord's Prayer. We're going to pray with the Lord's Prayer. Now, I just wanted to tell you that one day I was talking to a woman about the power of the Lord's Prayer, and she told me this nice story. This was in England, and the woman said, "Oh, you lectured for our church. One of your first lectures was given in our church, and it was on the Lord's Prayer. It was called Our True Environment, the Kingdom of Heaven." She said, "Do you remember there were two ladies who came up to you afterwards, and they were not Christian Scientists?" And I said, "Yes, I did remember." And they said to me that they had never ever heard the Lord's Prayer said that way before, and they thanked me for it. Well, they went back to their little church, and the pastor of their church was dying with cancer. And the members had been trying to pray for him. So they called a meeting of all the women in the church, and they told him about my talk and about the way that I prayed with the Lord's Prayer. And they asked all the women in the church, "Will you pray with the Lord's Prayer for our pastor, like she did for that man?" And they did, and he got completely healed. Wouldn't it be nice if we would do that for our church members? So many of our members have grown weary and discouraged, and they've turned to medication for help. Not because they want to, but because they're frightened, or because they're under pressure from their family. And I feel that we really, really need to pray to support them, to hold up their arms. Wouldn't it be nice if we knew someone in our church who turned to medication? If some of us, a group of us together, could say, "We would love to pray with you, to help you to get off medication, to see that Christian Science really does heal." Doesn't it tell us in the New Testament, if your brother's sick, take it unto the churches? Well, we're not doing that kind of healing. We're not doing that kind of work. We might do it for individuals or members of our family, but we're not really doing it for the members of our church. I often have you sat in church, or I've sat in church, and seen one of our members and thought they don't look too good, and then think, well, really, it's not my business, they haven't asked me for help. We should pray for every member of our church to know that they are the children of God, and that they have everything they need, every moment. I have a friend who lives in Canada, and I met this man some years ago in South Africa, where he had lived for many years. And when his work there was finished, he and his wife decided to come back and live in England, because they are British. And when he came home, his wife became ill, and she died with bone cancer. And he went to live in Canada, and he became quite discouraged with Christian Science. He felt that it didn't answer his wife's need, or his. So he went to Canada and he attended church, but he didn't become a member. He felt that he didn't want to. Well, I have seen him several times over the years, and he calls me a couple of times a week, or sometimes I call him. And just about 18 months ago, he called me and said that he hadn't been feeling well, and he asked me for some help. And I was quite pleased, because he had not been wanting Christian Science help. So I gave him some help, and then I had to go away to give some talks. And I asked him if he wanted me to stay with him while I was away, and he said no, it would be okay. So when I came back, he told me he'd gone to medical in the meantime. And they had taken him into hospital, and they'd done all these tests, and they said that he had bone cancer, and that he only had 3 months to live. And he was very, very calm about it all. He said, "I'm a good age, and I've had a good life, and I'm prepared to go. They told me to set all my affairs in order." So he said, "I've sold my car, and I've paid for my own funeral." And I said, "Look, why don't you start planning your testimony, not your funeral. And he said, well, I told you I don't want Christian Science treatment. I've chosen to go this route. And you have to respect my wishes. So I said, okay. But he still would call me. And sometimes I would quote something from Mrs. Eddy's writings. And he would say, no, you stop that. No, we're not having any Christian Science treatment. And I would say, well, okay. Well, what about the 23rd Psalm? How does that grab you? And he would say, that's okay. Well, what about the Lord's Prayer? And that's okay too. So we would pray with the Lord's Prayer, and we pray with the 23rd Psalm. But no Christian Science getting in there. So we did this for several months. And he had to go back a few months ago for a checkup. And the doctors couldn't believe it. And they x-rayed him 3 times. And they said, we don't know what's happened, but your cancer has been arrested. We can't find it anymore, and you can go home. He came home, he moved house. He moved into a place where there are other people his age, but he could have his own apartment. And he's getting well fed, and he's going out, he's been to the theatre, and he's doing all sorts of things. And I was so grateful that I had the patience to stay with him. Because there were times I felt like saying, well, why are you calling me? You don't want Christian Science treatment. So why are you calling me? You know, that's all we need. We need a little bit more love, a little bit more encouragement, a little bit more of caring for each other. I have a good friend in New York whose grandmother, or great-grandmother went through class, had class instruction when she was 15 with one of Mrs. Eddy's students. She went through class at that age because her parents were both going through class. And they wrote to the teacher and they said, we don't know what to do with our 15-year-old while we're having class. And she said, bring her along, dear. And she came and she sat through class. And at the end of the class, the teacher told them to do what Mrs. Eddy told her students, go out and heal somebody. And this young girl healed her neighbour of Bright's disease. And she was only 15. She went into the full-time practice when she was 18, and she was a teacher at 22. And this great-granddaughter of hers told me that when she was a teenager, she was at the ice rink skating, and she fell. And this very tall young man, who was about 6'4", ran over her face with his rollerblade skate and severed her nose from her face. And her face looked absolutely terrible. And her parents were at their association meeting, and they brought her to a hospital, but she said she didn't want to stay there, and they said, believe me, you have to stay here. You're going to need plastic surgery. And anyhow, she stayed there overnight, and her parents came back the next day, and her parents said, you know, you could maybe have a terrible scar right on your face, and she's very pretty. Do you want Christian Science treatment, or do you want to go along with the medical? She said, I won't mind. In this case, this is very serious. But this young girl said, no, I want to work it out in Christian Science. And they lived in a very small community, and they came up against much criticism because the bruising on her face looked so bad, and people thought that her parents were neglecting her. But she was completely healed in 6 weeks. She's a practitioner today as well. Isn't it wonderful to meet all these people in our movement who've been so faithful all through the years? Well, another thing I want to talk to you about is You know, in Mrs. Eddy's time, Mrs. Eddy kept a watch for 1 hour every day. And some of her students did that too. And there was a Mrs. Mims. Have you ever heard of Mrs. Mims? She was a great Christian Science teacher. And she encouraged her students to keep a watch as well. And this is something from the memoirs of Elizabeth Earl Jones, who was a student of Mrs. Mims. It says, in the memoirs of Elizabeth Earl Jones, one of the early workers in the field, we are told that Elizabeth learned early to be a consecrated world worker. When she was with her teacher, Mrs. Mims, which was often, Mrs. Mims would call Miss Jones to her in the evening, when she spent an hour every evening working for the whole world. They joined in the evening watch held by our leader and other of her students, and the whole world benefited because of it. Now, I myself have loved the idea of the evening watch, and I try to do it, especially when I'm at home. It's difficult when you're traveling to keep to that, but I do try to do it when I'm at home. And one thing I would like to say to Americans, please keep an evening watch and pray more for your country. Do you know that you have the most precious country in the world? The most wonderful country. Only America could have been ready for Christian Science. There's not another country in the world. Ireland couldn't have been ready. America has such a big, expansive thought. It could only have been born here. And so error would try to spoil your country by letting all sorts of wickedness in. Wickedness in your government, wickedness in your young people, to try to ruin the best country in the world. And you have to pray for it. I often pray for America. And Miss Jones recognized the importance of the United States, and she saw the consistent need of prayerful support for it. And she wrote this: the United States of America is the birthplace of Mary Baker Eddy, the discoverer and founder of Christian Science. As our Constitution was evolved as the result of prayer, it requires prayer to sustain, guide, and prosper America. No other country would or could have protected and safeguarded the discoverer and founder of Christian Science and her teachings and her church, as has our great republic. America, to me, is like Joseph in the Bible. Joseph's brothers were very jealous of him because he had a different mother, a mother that his father loved very much. And his father loved Joseph, and he gave him this very special coat of many colors, which really only belonged to kings and people high up in authority. They were very jealous and envious of this. And because of that, they tried, first of all, to kill him. And they took away his coat in many colors and dipped it in sheep's blood and took it back to his brother, to their father, and pretended that he had died. And they put him in a pit, and he was sold into slavery. But no matter what happened, he accepted it with such dignity because he, as a young man, had had a vision that he saw these 7 sheaves of corn bowing to him. And he knew that God had a special purpose for his life. So it didn't matter what happened. He realized, he kept the secret of his purpose. And even when he was in jail and he was tempted again by his boss's wife, he never gave in to those temptations. And he became the head of this big country. And in the end, he was able to feed his own father and brothers. And he forgave them. And he said to them, "It wasn't you that sent me hither. It was God." And I think America's like Joseph. The world is jealous of America, just like his brothers were jealous of him. But I believe that America has a very special purpose in God's plan. And we have to pray to see that that plan can evolve without hindrance. And Miss Jones relates a wonderful example of how prayer and watching can make a difference in our government and to the leaders of a country, whichever country that happens to be. And this is a story. President Hoover was to be at Kings Mountain battlefield in North Carolina for a ceremony. A few days before this was to take place, a Secret Service man interested in Christian Science discovered a plot to assassinate the president. He stopped off in Asheville to contact Miss Jones, and failing to reach her, gave the information to her sister Emily with the urgent request for Miss Jones to do special prayerful work. And Miss Jones wrote of this experience. "My sister and I shut ourselves in our room and worked the 4 hours that the president was in our state. We did nothing but work. While we were working, we both seemed to feel overwhelmed with the most terrific sense of load and burden. It was almost crushing in its cruel weight. But we worked on until we felt it lift. We handled hate, hypnotism, criticism, propaganda, confusion of human opinions, human influences, prejudices, etc. It lifted as we worked, until we could feel that the burden was upon God's shoulders, as was the government also. Meanwhile, at the battlefield, appropriate security steps were being taken, and all went well. The morning after the President returned to Washington, his private secretary gave an interview to the Associated Press, in which he said how much the President had enjoyed his visit to North Carolina, and how rested and refreshed he felt from his brief trip south. Then the secretary asked, "The President says that since his return he has felt the lifting of a crushing load that descended upon him when he took the oath of office. And this is the first time in 2 years that he's had any relief from it." I give credit to the Secret Service for protecting the President, Miss Jones said in her closing narrative, but Christian Science went farther and lifted this weight as nothing else could. Now, I read that story some months ago when I was watching all this news about your president and about the naughty things he was getting up to, and I was having a hard time coping with it. But when I read this story, I thought how much we need to support people in a position like this. Who knows what tempted him to do the things that he did? Perhaps he just needed some kind of relief or escape or whatever. And even if he's as wrong can be, your country has a right to its dignity. You don't want the world laughing at your president, do you? I'm sure you don't. So we need to pray for him. We can pray with our Father, which art in heaven, that he's his Father too, that he's the Father of every member of your government, and he's the Father of the security forces, and he's the Father of all those people who are out there on the streets with mental problems, who do shootings, the shooting that happened at the White House. We have to pray for these people too, because they're only being handled by evil. And we have to know that our Father is the mind that is God, is the mind of all. And that mind isn't damaged, and no evil can get into that mind. That mind is your mind, and my mind, and their mind. And so, today, I'm going to ask everyone a favour of you. Will ye watch with me 1 hour? Will you try to take 1 hour out of your day and pray for your country and pray for the world? And even if you feel, well, I don't know where to start with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father. And include everybody in America in it. Everybody in government. Security forces, people who have to make decisions. Include all the people who are suffering from loneliness and despair and terrible disease. You can do it in your car if you're stuck in the traffic. You can do it anywhere. You don't have to take a special time of day. Just take some time. And if every one of you were to do that, what a difference we would make. What a difference we'd make to ourselves and to our world and to the cause of Christian Science. We would begin to see it really does heal, quickly, effectively, and permanently. So when I pray with the Lord's Prayer for the world, I also pray for every Christian Scientist in the world, that God will feed us all with fresh inspiration, vision, and hope. That He'll help us to hold on, to not let go. To pray that God's presence and power be felt, as in heaven, so on earth. God is omnipotent, supreme. Pray that we be not tempted into material ways and methods of solving our problems. Pray that we be not tempted by evil in any form. Pray for the ability to forgive, and that others have the ability to forgive us. And most of all, pray that we may be willing and able to express the love that is divine, the impartial, unconditional love that is God. As God's children, we reflect all that God is, and it's natural for us to love. If we're not loving, we're not really living, because we're God's children, and our reason for being is to express Him, and He is love. If love is life, as Mrs. Eddy tells us in her poem, then we need to love in the way that God loves. And we're only loving when we're seeing the truth about everyone. Human loving isn't any good. That's human doing gooding. And it isn't any good. The only way that you can love your brother as yourself is to love him as yourself, to see him as God's child, spiritual, upright, whole, honest. You can do that for your president. And pray to know that Christian Science is the truth, and it heals right now, quickly, effectively, and permanently. Pray to know that every day. Christian Science is the truth, and it heals quickly, effectively, and permanently. And I know it, and every Christian Scientist in the world knows it, and we can't be made to doubt it. If everybody declared that, the practitioner's work would become easier. Now, we can't be made to do ours work for it by believing that we've lost our ability to heal. It was never our ability. It didn't belong to Christian Scientists in the good old days, and doesn't belong to us. God is the only healer And he hasn't lost his ability, and he never will. So we have to put the power to heal where it belongs, in God's hands. And we have to be like the Master and declare, I can of my own self do nothing, but I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. Now the Christ that strengtheneth you is your own identity, your own Christ-like selfhood. When you declare, I am the child of God, made in his image and likeness. I was never born into matter, never grew up in it, never was conditioned into it nor by it. I'll never die out of it. I am the child of God. I have never left heaven for earth. That's the Christ. That's your true identity and my true identity and everybody's. Now forget that we are small in number. Stop counting the numbers. The Master only had 12, sorry. And he must have believed that that was enough. So we have to think that we're like Gideon's army. We are enough. And we have to prove it's quality that counts and not the quantity. Never mind what the other members of your church are doing or not doing. It's what are you doing and what am I doing that counts. My husband said there's a saying in the Marine that says that 1 volunteer is worth 10 enlisted men. And that's true. So we want all volunteers to be members of our church. So be a volunteer, a willing worker, and pray with me, and the quality of that prayer can change our world, where just one with God is a majority. In Rudimental Divine Science it says, ask God to give thee skill in comfort's art, that thou mayest consecrated be and set apart unto a life of highest ministry. This is the highest position attainable. This is the prayer that heals. Now, if any of you have a question, don't be afraid to ask. Don't be shy. Anybody got a question?
I'd like to make a comment. I am very moved by your wonderful.
Oh, thank you there. Thank you very much. One time I gave a lecture in a prison, and at the end I asked, do you have any questions? And nobody answered, and I said, you must have some questions, surely. And one man stood up and he said, lady, you answered questions I didn't know I had. That's a good answer, isn't it? So have I answered your questions, or do you still have some? You got one?
Yes, could you tell us again what it was that the two ladies worked on in the town in the prison there? What were the things that they covered?
Well, they covered a lot of things. Let me see. Right, my sister and I shut ourselves in our room and worked the 4 hours that the President was in our state. We did nothing but work. Okay, we handled hate, hypnotism, criticism, propaganda, confusion of human opinions, human influences, prejudices, etc. It lifted as we worked. I like that they worked on human opinions. You know, Mrs. Eddy said that human opinions are valueless. And look how much store we set by them. Human opinion, what so-and-so said and what so-and-so. We listen to that stuff all the time. Thank you. Good, that's good. Thank you. Any other questions? Well, I think it was the prayer. I don't think that there's a country in the world has been prayed over as much as Ireland. You know, Ireland is a church-going country, and people in their own way have been praying, as well as Christian Scientists, and people throughout the world have been praying. And I'm sure that that's what's breaking it up. And there is a lot of progress being made, but then we had a setback this summer, as you know, with the Orange Men and the 3 young boys who died. But I think that we still get back onto this steady footing. We see a change in the IRA and their thinking. Excuse me, they want to handle it in a different way, and that's good. So I thank everybody who has ever prayed for Ireland, and I know that a lot of Americans do. You had a question?
Yes. From your observation, what would you say is the most aggressive suggestion putting forth today against the effectiveness of spiritual healing and being perfect?
Well, I think the most aggressive suggestion is that it does not heal. The power of medical belief, and we have all these other things that go along with it now, you know, all sorts of things like reflexology and all different things. What's it called? Mind, body, spirit or something. Holistic healing. I think that is also doing us harm. That it has more light in it than drugs and medication. I'm not saying that that's all bad and that people shouldn't do it. But I still think that people are still too concentrated on the human body. That there's too much emphasis put on that. And I also think that we're getting so much stuff through the media. I mean, on television now they show you operations and all this stuff, that I really think that Christian Scientists have to guard themselves and have to do more work than they normally do, metaphysically. Because I think that error has it's got its big guns out. It knows that its days are short, and it has its big guns out. And if we don't watch, if we don't keep these watches, if we don't keep our thinking right, we won't be able to stand up against it. We soon be down on the same level. Like that man who came to my door, if he'd come half an hour earlier, I tell you, I think I would have taken him to hospital. But because I had prayed that way, that was a great lesson. You know, people think that Northern Ireland is a terrible place to live. But I have to tell you, it's a most growing place to live. Because you get forced to pray like you'd never prayed before. So I'm grateful that I live there, because I feel that I've grown in my own understanding of God. And every problem in the world is the result of people's false concept of God. In Ireland, we have the Catholic thought, and then we have the extreme Protestants who go the other way. And this is the war that's raging, you know, between the true concept of God as love and loving us all equally. And you find that in the Middle East as well. It's not really a religious war. It's people's concept of God. So if you have a problem, you have to say to yourself, what's my concept of God? Do I think that God's big man up there in the sky and that he might reach down and help me? Or do you think that you are God's expression of himself? You are God expressing himself as you. It's not you trying to express God. You, in truth, are God expressing himself as you. And if you get that right, you start getting everything right. When I'm at home and with my practice and the telephone goes, I say to myself, I am Christ's science. I will answer this call as Christ's science. So I tell the person whatever Christ's science is saying to this. We're still down on this human level, thinking we have to work our way up. We have to start out from perfection and see ourselves as the perfect child of God. And that's who each and every one of you are right now. No matter what you think about yourself, no matter what your family or friends think about you, only what God knows about you is true. And He knows that He made you perfect and beautiful and sinless and whole and healthy. That you're the expression of all that He is, so you express eternal life and love and harmony and bounty and everything that He is. And your true Christ-like selfhood knows that. You are the loved of love. Thank you. We have a question here.
Could you expand a little more on what the structure of a watch perhaps should be or could be?
Well, I just said if you're just starting out and you've never had a watch before, you've never done this, start with the Lord's Prayer. Now I would say that this watch is going to be for your country. Our Father. So then you know that our Father is the Father of all. He's the Father of your President. He's the Father of every member of your President's family, of every member of his government. He's the Father of every American everywhere. And He is the one intelligent mind, the all-knowing, the all-seeing, the all-wise, the all-loving, the all-acting. And that He's governing and guiding every American everywhere, including your President. You can start out, you can go right through the Lord's Prayer as I did it. If you want, and I haven't asked David about this, but I could leave some of these pages on the Lord's Prayer, and maybe he would, and on a watch, and maybe David would photocopy them and let you have them for a small fee. You think that sounds okay, David?
Sure.
Yeah, I think that's good. If it gets people going on watches, I think that's nice. I gave this talk in Pasadena recently, and so many people told me they were going to start having watches, and one woman said to me, my friend and I are going to do it together because I don't think I could do it by myself. But that's okay. That's good. Just watch, 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 and pray. Is that every question? You've got one?
My thought is with a lot of young children and people and teenagers, because there seem to be so many broken homes, and it seems like nobody goes to church. And can you give a thought about children and their spirituality and just...
Well, I'm very happy that you brought that up, because we really need to pray for the children of the world. Because it seems that younger and younger and younger, they're like old men and old women. They know everything that's going on in the world. And it's like their purity and their innocence was just